Trevecca Nazarene University uses a lot of these book resources as well, of all these false teachers. Trevecca Nazarene has used Prayer Labyrinth. President Dan Boone recently wrote back and forth with me a few months ago, and he said, for someone to grasp the word labyrinth and fill it with meaning that is pagan and accuse us of those type practices is either a gross misunderstanding or an intentional lie. But the fact of the matter is, they were using the prayer labyrinth, and they may still be using it, although they have taken it down from their website after I wrote my article about the prayer labyrinth. Trevecca goes on an annual spiritual formation retreat at the Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky, which is the spiritual home to Thomas Merton. Dr. Boone says, we choose the Abbey for our silent retreat for several reasons. It is affordable room and board for our students, and the monks neither teach nor participate in the retreat. Although a monk was scheduled to do the opening prayer before they started the retreat, and the students were clearly invited to join the monks in some of their prayer walks and other activities while they were there at the retreat. This has been going on for several years, much to the amazement of many people. At the end of one of his other comments, Dr. Boone says, I'm sure God prefers that we get silent and listen, and we teach our students how to discern the voice of God. I thought we could discern the voice of God simply by reading the scriptures and learning what God has to say to us through his revealed word. Not to sit in silence, not to practice the silence as is advertised for that retreat that Trevecca students go to. Point Loma Nazarene University promotes contemplative spirituality and welcomes emergent speakers. March 2008, Brian McLaren was there to speak on campus, and it was not the first time. In February 2009, the Center for Pastoral Leadership had the pleasure of hosting Pastors Day 2009 for over 200 pastors from San Diego area. This year, they were pleased to welcome their special guest, author Brian McLaren. I'm sure he spoke unopposed. They've also welcomed Tony Campolo. He's a big promoter of contemplative prayer. He practices the Jesus prayer every morning for 20 minutes. The school's chaplain, Mark Carter, is apparently drawn to contemplative spirituality in his bio. He praised the monk, Brother Roger. Brother Roger was the founder of TACE, an interspiritual worship center in France that promotes ecumenical services with Buddhists, Hindus, and other religions, and that was recommended as a good place for teens to visit in one of the books sold by Barefoot Ministries, which is an arm of the Nazarene Publishing House. And I have a question here. Should a Christian chaplain be telling students that his hero is someone who promotes interspirituality? Eastern Nazarene College has a professor who teaches evolution, who teaches open theism. They sponsored an open theism seminar. They have hosted speakers such as Thomas Ord, who teaches openly open theism, and John Middendorf, one of the main Nazarene promoters of emergent ideology. The Nazarene Theological Seminary has welcomed contemplative practices. They've even sponsored and promoted practices to preteens. Here in the Best Practices Children's Ministry of summer of 2009, instead of a traditional preteen retreat, we created a weekend for preteens to stop from the busyness of life and simply focus on prayer. And some styles of prayer that they talked about included visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and silent. And they used things such as pottery, icons, global issues, prayer beads, postures, music, and silence. The response was overwhelming as each preteen found specific ways to engage in prayer that were meaningful for his or her own personality, again accommodating the person instead of just teaching the gospel. Just before General Assembly last year, many of us were concerned and asked questions about the spiritual formation retreat that was sponsored at a Roman Catholic site in Orlando, Florida. Barefoot Ministries is a youth publishing arm of Nazarene Publishing House and is heavily promoting contemplative spirituality to our youth. They're promoting the use of prayer beads, the teaching of Lectio Divina. Again, I mentioned promotion of pilgrimages to the interspiritual worship center in France called Taizé, where Buddhists and other religions worship together as one. And one of their books even gives instructions on how to build your own prayer labyrinth. In a recent book called 180, which I have a summary of downstairs in a review, they're promoting a new book filled with stories of how people change their minds. That review will be available on my blog soon, and that review is available downstairs. It is unbelievable, some of the stuff that is being promoted in this particular book. Nazarene churches across the country are using prayer labyrinths. They are using Lectio Divina, Christian yoga. They're participating in ecumenical services and sharing the Eucharist with Roman Catholic churches. Wide use of books by emergent and mystical authors is being used as devotionals for small group study. Leaders are recommending that blasphemy-filled book, The Shack, is a great missional book and a good resource for pastors and Christians. What are these emergent pastors doing? They're preaching non-judgmentalism. They don't want to rock the boat. They're preaching and promoting ecumenism instead of preaching separation from the world and from false teaching. They're using Roman Catholic style terminology, including using the Eucharist now instead of communion. Many of us know that the Eucharist in Roman Catholic practice is a heretical teaching, that the body and blood of Christ becomes real, and you are actually participating with the body and the blood of Christ. That is not true. That is a false teaching. Yet we are welcoming these practices from the Roman Catholic Church. These pastors sometimes are pushing the emergent agenda and sometimes very quietly, sneaking this in slowly like poison. They are forcing longtime members to leave their church if they dare to question anything. I won't have time to go into it now, but I am a result of that questioning. And I know many across the country who have given similar stories to me of how they were forced to leave their church of years and years because they dared to question what was going on. They are using books by false teachers like Rob Bell and Richard Foster as great resources for their congregations. And they are watering down sermons with more emphasis on love and a lot less emphasis on the wrath of God, our unworthiness as sinners, on hell and the future judgment that is coming. They do not want to preach too much on that